So this is part 2 of chapter number 9, that is Indus Valley Civilization. And the previous episode of the same chapter we studied about, let's see, what was it? Arts, crafts and industries. Then there was, what was it? So just to, social and economic life and the town. All right. So since there were arts and craft and other manifestations of arts, all right, so it is safe to assume that these people had relative leisure time. All right, so if you assume that the people who lived in the ancient ages, all right, they had already made the transition from hunter gatherers, because hunter gatherer people did not have time and leisure to think about arts. Okay, it is only after they realized that they could settle down at one place, build an economy around the cows, and hence cow was venerated. All right, but that is discussion for some other video. But yes, these people, they had realized that they could settle down at one place, and they had time and leisure for arts and crafts and all that, and hence you find that the artifacts, most of the artifacts that are discovered from these areas, all right, they have some or the other artistic tendencies, such as pottery, beads, jewels, and whatnot. Okay, so these people were deeply entrenched in art because they had time and leisure. All right, so we've discussed sufficiently in the first part of this chapter. If you have missed that, you can watch that in the playlist. It would be numbered appropriately. All right, so the next section for this is religion. Okay, now religion in a conventional sense, okay, it is very misinterpreted and misconstrued term in our country. Just because the British, and I would not blame everything on the British, okay, we have this tendency of blaming each and everything that went wrong with our country on the British. They are to be blamed. I'm not saying they are absolved of all the wrongs that they have done. Okay, that is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there is the other half of that reason is the other monotheistic tradition, that is Islam. Okay, both the monotheistic traditions have come over here, made their wholehearted efforts to convert us to either of their traditions, and up to a certain extent I would say both of them have failed miserably, but their persistence still continues, and there is, like, right out in the open conversion things going on, and those videos are live telecasted on YouTube, and the governments, just because of secularism, they just sit over there and let it happen. All right, so religion in the Western term of the sense, it usually means a certain set of principles by which the entire population has to abide. Okay, let's take Christianity for example. Although they have multiple denominations within the Christendom itself, all right, but there are certain fixed principles, okay, the Holy Trinity and all the other things. So there are certain set fixed principles that they are supposed to abide by. For them, this is religion, a certain set of principles by which the entire population of a country abides, and there should be no deviation, divergence, or incongruence between the principles that the entire population abides by. All right, so this is their understanding of religion. The same thing is with the another monotheistic tradition, that is Islam. Okay, they are rather extremely radical when it comes to monotheism. Okay, in fact, they are the most radical monotheistic faith there is. All right, and in a way that is also false. You'll see there are many schisms within the Islam itself, but that is again agenda for different video. Right now we are focusing on the religious aspect of the Indus Valley civilization. All right. So if you know, okay, America, the United States, one thing that separates United States from all the other European countries is it's the culture, the American culture. They're very much possessive, very much conscious, and very much, possessive and conscious about the fact that their culture is superior. And indeed, there is an argument to be made that American culture is supreme. All right. So that is what defines religion for Bharat. Okay, the way of life, it's the way that we live. Okay, That is what has been classified as religion by the people of the West. Okay, so the things that we do in our day to day lives is religion for us. All right, so it's clearly indistinguishable by our from our day to day activities. All right, and you'll see this tendency of the traditional practices and the cultural practices of Bharat being indistinguishable from their day to day activities. uh, Islam has, incorporated this, a cheap imitation of it. Okay, every aspect of your life, there will be some or the other commentary by any Islamic scholar on that particular activity. Okay, this principle has been lifted from the traditional and the cultural practices of Bharat. Okay, but because for us there is no distinction between that religion and our day-to-day lives, right? So yes, on that definition, let's talk about the religion that R.C. Majumdar writes in his book, and in this chapter number 9, that is Indus Valley Civilization. All right. In that he writes, no buildings regarded as temples or even those doubtfully classed as have been yielded and have yielded no religious relics. Okay, so far um, excavation has not yielded any religious relics. That is because you think that religion is something that is different from your day-to-day life or your day-to-day activities. Okay, in this part of the world, everything is religion. You cannot divorce your day-to-day existence from religion. It's not two separate entities. And if you're making a case that both of these things are separate, then I would make a case both of them coincide perpetually and perennially. Okay, yes, but there are also some figures that have been discovered. Some of the figures are smoke stained. Imagine when you perform those daily rituals that you have to, you light an incense stick in your designated temple that you might have at your place. Okay, it's very important for you to do these things. Some of the figurines that have been discovered in the Indus Valley civilization, they have some smoke stains. Okay, imagine if you light an incense stick near a temple idols, it will leave some smoke stains, and such things have been discovered from the sites of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. So this makes you wonder if more than 2 millennium ago, 1 millennium is 1,000 years, so more than 2,000 years ago, people were lighting incense stick in front of stone idols, which to this very day majority of the population of this country does. Okay, these figures are rightly taken to represent mother or nature goddess. Yes, their god or whichever entity that they worshipped um, had similarities with the forces of nature. Okay. Imagine you've just made this transition from hunter gatherer. You have just established this idea that you can settle down at one place, depend on one animal for food products and nourishment. So, obviously, you are bound to worship it. Okay. And on top of that, since your survival depends on the forces of nature, okay, now that they were settled at one place, they had the leisure and time to ponder upon these things, that why do the clouds move, why does the sun rises from a certain direction, and why do so and so things happen around us. Hence they came to venerate nature. Okay, so you'll see that the godly entity of the people from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were the forces of nature. Okay, the mother goddess is this is page number 190 in chapter number 9. The mother goddess is represented in every village as the tutelary deity and is known under various names such as Mata, Amba, Amma, Kali, Karali, etc. Sometimes to be dreaded, sometimes warding off evil spirits, imparting fertility, etc. So there was some female goddess. Okay, now this is where my profound disagreement with the monotheistic tradition comes in, and more specifically Islam, because if you think the creator of this universe, okay, came into existence by magic, okay, you have to keep this fundamental principle in mind, that to birth something new you need two dimensions. One is the masculine dimension, another one is the feminine dimension. Okay, then and only then these two can come into unison and birth a new entity. So, if you believe that the God Almighty is somebody who came into existence with asexual reproduction, Okay, you have some explanation, clearly some explanation to do. Okay, so you need two separate entities, the feminine entity, the masculine entity, to fuse together to create something new. So if the God Almighty is, a male, how did that male come into existence? There has to have a female component for it to exist. Okay, so yes, Mother Goddess was worshipped all throughout the Indus Valley civilization. Further, R.C. Majumdar goes and writes this: the goat sacrifice has survived in the worship of Shakti, another form of Mother Goddess. Okay, yes, goat sacrifice or sacrificial practices were very much common in the Indus Valley civilization. We are not going to deny that. It is what it is, it is part of our culture. Among the male gods, the most remarkable is a three faced deity wearing a horned headdress, seated cross legged on a throne, and surrounded by elephant, tiger, buffalo, and rhinoceros. Okay, so how do you interpret these things? If there is an image of a god, why does it have animals next to it? Okay, I understand this logic that there was this concept of vehicles, animals driving gods around. Okay, then why are they standing next to the god in the seal? Okay, so that also is open to interpretation. You can interpret it in a way that they were the helpers, they were the consorts and the helpers of the god. Secondly, they were the army, they were the assistants and whatnot. So it is open to interpretation since it was 2 millennia ago. It is open to the interpretation. You can interpret it the way that makes sense to you, because we are the direct descendants of all the people who lived in the Harappa and the Mohenjo-daro civilization. Okay, and the Aryan invasion theory that we'll discuss in the next chapter. The next chapter in this book is the Aryan problem that we'll discuss in the further videos of this series. But right now we'll focus on the population and the religion of that population. What exactly did they do for their spiritual upliftment, okay, or spiritual gratification? Yes. One very important thing is there is a seal. Okay, the history students would know there was a Pashupati seal that was discovered from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. So what could this mean? The deity in that seal was seated in a Padmasan. Padmasan is a yogic posture. Okay, so do you think that the person who carved that or drew the picture of that God Almighty on that seal just imagined it out of the blue that this God is sitting in this yogic posture without any antecedents? Okay, this is again open to your interpretation and your appeal to reason. You can think about it, ponder about it. Was it on that very day that this yogic posture of Padmasan was discovered, or did it exist centuries prior to it and it was perfected over centuries with trial and error, and it was a matter of collective wisdom? All right, this is again all open to interpretation because it was clearly 2 millennia ago. Okay, so you are free to draw your inspirations. What something that I have realized after studying the ancient history is all the things that were presented to us in the form of facts, in the form of ancient history of Bharat, are rather assumptions by the Westerners. People who discovered these sites in 1922, those were the ones who formed some assumptions, and we are led to believe that you are supposed to believe these assumptions. All right. Yep. So it is all open to interpretation for you as well. There was also male worship as well, that is Shiva. Okay, the great Lord. Yes, it does appears, R.C. Majumdar writes on page number 191, it does appears that Shiva was one of the principal deities of people along with the mother goddess. So there is some clear rational conviction, okay, that if indeed there was an almighty, there has to have two dimensions, meaning a masculine dimension and a feminine dimension. Hence, thenceforth, an almighty can be birthed. So if you're saying without the existence of these two dimensions, almighty was birthed, then you are saying that God was born through asexual reproduction. Yeah. Or an even more absurd idea that it happened magically. Okay, the feeding throws which appear Before, some of these have been taken as symbolizing food offerings to beasts which could not be domesticated, indicating the animals as objects of worship. Some of these animals were regarded as vahana or vehicles of the gods. Okay, so feeding food to animals is a very, very ancient practice. And when I say ancient, I mean 2 millennia ago. That is 2000 years ago. To this very day, you will find largely this has gone extinct in the urban areas. But if you move far away from the urban areas and into the rural areas, you see there is still continuation of this practice where people cook food specially for the animals and feed them separately. Okay, this practice originated in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. That is what R.C. Majumdar writes in his chapter number 991 page. All right, because these animals were regarded as vahanas or vehicles of the gods, meaning if you feed them, that animal will eat that food and straight away travel to the god. So your prayers might reach God. This is the ancient belief or the rationale behind why do we feed animals or why do we make foods especially for the animals. Okay, so if you are somebody from the Gen Z and you're not really aware of these things, you should go into the rural areas and ask people, do you specially cook food for animals? They'll say yes. Okay, and it's nothing to be ashamed about. It's a 2 millennia old practice that still continues. Okay, nowhere on the face of this earth such an old practice continues. Okay, thanks to the monotheistic traditions. Okay, next up, he writes, this is on page number 192. Apart from their use as pictographic signs, no birds appear on seals or other amulets. It seems, however, that the dove was looked upon as sacred, as some of the pottery models in the little pedestals exactly resemble those found at very early sites in Mesopotamia, where the dove was regarded as sacred to the mother goddess. This is something that really, irks me when I read this book of R.C. Majumdar. Is everything is explained in relation to the ancient civilizations of Sumer and Mesopotamia, as if the Indus Valley civilization or the Mohenjo-daro and Harappa civilization, which in future, after learning the next chapter, we will name it or rename it as the Aryan civilization, is always explained as something that is parallel to Mesopotamia and Sumer. Okay, and that gives you a sense that everything that has come over here, thanks to the other civilizations who taught this. Okay, that is the whole idea or the notion that you get from this book. Is because I wouldn't go as far as saying that R.C. Majumdar was operating, under dubious ideas. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is he wrote this book in a time when this idea of racial superiority was supreme. Okay, so he might have been convinced. Right now, since we are looking at this after, let's say, almost 8 or 9 decades. Okay, so hence we can sit in judgment, but not speaking ill of somebody or someone who has done an immense service in the form of this scholarship. At least something written exists for the posterity to sit in judgment, and all thanks to R.C. Majumdar for that. All right, so yeah, everything that is being discussed in this book, it has been drawn as a parallel to other civilizations, giving you this idea that the Aryan civilization did not, stand on its two own feet. All right. Next up, he writes, rectangular aisles separated from each other by long walls suggest the Vedic sacrificial altar of a rectangular shape, Agnishala paved with bricks, in which offerings were made to fire and other gods. Okay, again, this practice is largely extant in the urban areas because you're required to be modern and come far away from your cultural and traditional practices. But if you move away from the urban areas and go to the rural areas, even temples, you'll see that those structures, those brick mortar structures in which a fire is lit and offerings are done, the priests, they sit around it and they do some offerings. So those type of rectangular aisles have also been discovered from Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Okay, so imagine the practice that exists to this very day amongst the mass of the populace of Bharat had started 2 millennia ago. Okay, and we are made to believe that this practice was taught to us by the Nordic Aryans that came from Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Okay, so when was the last time you saw somebody from white countries doing home havan? Okay, so are we supposed to believe that something that they gave us we continue even after 2000 years, but they have left it? So that itself should tell you the absurdity of this argument. Okay. Next is swastika and the cross appear to be religious or magical symbols, as in Babylonia and Elam. See again, swastika as a symbol is, it's written in such a way that makes you want to think that, oh, it existed as a parallel, maybe it came from there. Okay, I'm reading his exact words. Swastika and the cross appear to be religious or magical symbols, as in Babylonia and Elam. Okay, this is what. Now, I'm not blaming R.C. Majumdar. I'm just putting it out there. Okay, I am no history scholar. I have I have no qualifications in history. Imagine me just sitting as a student in the class of history and raising these questions. Okay, now the answers to these questions are for you to do your own due diligence and come up with them. Okay, I'm just simply asking these questions because, quite frankly, nobody is. Next up is funerary custom. How did the people of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro dispose of the dead? Okay, so there are three forms of burial have been found at Mohenjo-daro, which is complete burials, fractional burials, and post-cremation burials. Okay, so cremation, as in burning of bodies as a practice, existed even 2000 or 2500 years ago. All right, so even the burials, it existed side by side as burials. Due to the lack of evidence, we don't know, but as many as 30 skeletons have been unearthed from all those sites, and some of them were burnt, some of them were completely, buried. So we don't exactly know, but yes, cremation as a practice existed. All right. Next up, we come up with the script. Okay, what exactly did those pictographic indications mean in the Indus script, or rather the Aryan script that we are going to establish in the next chapter? Okay, the Indus script has been characterized by most scholars as pictographic, meaning, to give you a reference, in the current day, if you are writing English, okay, you are writing it to convey sounds. Okay, but the Indus script is written to convey pictures, it is written in the form of pictures. All right, the script is found in one stage only, so that we cannot trace its genesis from the pictographic to the ideographic or phonetic, or its later development to any of the scripts of Bharat. Okay, now in the previous video we had discussed this, that the settlements that are discovered from these sites are in 7 layers. So imagine 7 layers of civilization existing with how many years in between, we don't know. Okay, we can only form rational conclusions and assumptions. That too, we are only supposed to agree with the Westerners, the assumptions that they make. Okay, so yes, in all those 7 layers, the script is found only in one stage, only in one of the layers. So we cannot trace its genesis. We cannot trace where did it begin. So that is the problem that we face again. You have two approaches over here. Either you believe that each of those 7 layers had the script, or you believe in the assumptions that the Western scholars have promoted and propagated. Okay. On page number 94, R.C. Majumdar writes, from the recurrence of certain characters and facing of the animals and a few other indications, it has rightly been inferred that the direction of writing is from right to left, meaning it is written from right to left. Remember how Hebrew as a language is written? If you look at the writings coming out of Israel, their language is Hebrew, so they'll write from right to left. Okay, normally English, Hindi, or Sanskrit, we write from left to right. Okay, inferred that the direction this, though in a few inscriptions the direction is from left to right. Meaning, some of the inscriptions that have been discovered also have a script that is written from left to right, but majority of them have a script that is from right to left. All right, but this in itself should not mean anything. We cannot draw any rational conclusion from this fact, And that is what R.C. Majumdar has said. Okay. Next up, he writes, it is not possible in the present stage of our knowledge to determine the language of the script. Some scholars take it to be Sanskrit, others as Dravidian. Okay. Like I said, this is what R.C. Majumdar says. Based on the available evidence, we cannot really determine if the language was Sanskrit or was it Dravidian. Okay. Dravidian, in a way, is a geographical indication. That is again a misnomer. Interestingly, there was a scholar, a native scholar who goes by the name of Rao Bahadur Dikshit. Okay, he observes that the resemblance with Sumerian and Proto-Elamite sign presages a close connection, at least in the formative stages. Similarities with the Egyptian and Chinese pictographs are superficial, and the Indus script developed independently on Indian soil. Okay, at least this fellow Rao Bahadur Dikshit has a spine to come up with the idea and the notion that no, the Indus script has, wholesomely and completely developed within the Indian soil. And why do we call it as Indian soil? That is something that I have disagreement with R.C. Majumdar all across this book. Okay, India as a name did not exist in the time that we are discussing right now. The time that we are discussing right now is, 2000 or 2500 years ago, 2.5 millennia ago. So India as a name, as a word, did not exist. In fact, the script from which India as a name comes from did not exist at that time. So I don't know why, but since for the lack of a better word, we use that word. Okay, but in a sense, India means a land where the message of monotheistic tradition has not spread. Okay, a land that is available for proselytization. In that is in effect what India means, the land of pagans. All right. Next up is, we have nothing to rely on as the original or the Proto-Dravidian language. The language could have been static during these 5,000 years. We don't know concretely. The material at our disposal is sufficiently large, but despite earnest attempts by scholars, no real light can be thrown on the subject which may find general acceptance. Again, there are different assumptions by different scholars. So whatever that you are led to believe about the ancient history of Bharat is all a bunch of concocted assumptions. Okay, and those assumptions are not devoid of confirmation bias that the white scholars had when they came out with these assumptions, because they had to prolong their rule over the colony that was Bharat, and hence they could not stand the idea that the people of Bharat would know that they were a superior race. Okay, they had to clearly hide the fact. Okay, so like we have discussed in our previous video, they were left with two options. Either they would completely concede that yes, the civilization or the Aryan civilization of Bharat was a superior one, or they could claim some part in it. Okay, so they went with the second option, and hence they came up with this false theory of Aryan migration. Okay, since they have a superior culture, somebody from our side of the world must have come over here and taught them these things. For your information, this theory has been totally disapproved. Okay, it is clearly outdated. If you're not aware of this, please go on the internet and look for it. Okay, the next is the antiquity of the culture, meaning how old is it. It is as old as time. For what I believe, it has been there since the dawn of time. Okay, but let's see what R.C. Majumdar had to write. He writes that there are 7 different layers of building at Mohenjo-daro. Obviously, we don't know what was the time elapsed between each layer. Okay, it is safe to assume it had to be in centuries. So if there are 7 layers of civilization and you've only discovered the top layer in 1922, okay, and so far you have discovered 7 layers. Okay, and one thing also that people should keep in mind over right now is the 7 rivers that pass across the Punjab plains, or in that part of the South Asia. There is still a lot of evidence lying beneath those riverbeds, but we have not excavated it due to obvious reasons, because there existed no such water bodies during that time. Okay, it is believed by scholars that there was a flood, and hence it changed the course of rivers. Okay, yes. So next up comes evacuation has brought, this is page number 995. Evacuation has brought to light 7 different layers of buildings at Mohenjo-daro. Yes, earlier layers lie submerged under subsoil water. Okay, 1,000 years be assigned on the occupation of 7 cities of Mohenjo-daro. It is safe to assume that, okay, that at least the time elapsed between each layer of buildings at Mohenjo-daro has to be in centuries, because the kind of art that they have perfected, the kind of skill that they have acquired through trial and error would take centuries. Okay, the immaculate town planning should be one example. Okay. Next up is various Indus Valley objects in datable strata, blah blah blah. Okay. So here they have fixed a date. An Indus seal confined to the late period at Mohenjo-daro was found at some other place in layers pertaining to 2600 to 2500 BC. So there is a place called Ashnuna. I don't know where this place is, but there was a Indus seal found, a Mesopotamian seal found in the layer that is dated back to 2600 to 2500. So are we supposed to believe that the seal that they found, okay, it was only once that they traded, and on that very day that seal was buried. Okay. So that the early period at Mohenjo-daro reaches back to about 2800 BC. Okay. So here he writes, R.C. Majumdar writes, on a careful consideration of all available material for the age of the Indus civilization, some of which has been indicated above, it appears that the main culture period at Mohenjo-daro or Harappa culture ranged between 2800 to 2500 BC. So as close as 3000 years ago. Okay. Though it must have been a long history of antecedent development. This is what I'm talking about, antecedent development. When you discover something in the form of archaeological evidence and it sounds and it appears too perfect, that does not mean that in that very period, in the, let's say in a span of a few decades, that technique was perfected. Okay. A logical example would be the Pashupati seal that was discovered in the Harappa culture. The posture in which that deity is sitting. Okay, it's not like on the time of engraving that design on that seal that God was sitting in that posture. Okay, that is a science, that is a practice that was perfected over centuries of trial and error. So you'll have to imagine, okay, you'll have to imagine how much long before did the science of yogic practice exist. This is for you to think. I'm not making any tall claims over here. I'm simply just poking holes in the theory, things that we have been made to believe through our education. Okay, so let's see. So that is antecedent development. Though it must have had a long history of antecedent development before it reached the stage we meet, no idea of that period can be had, as the lowermost strata cannot be reached at Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Jukhar, Chanudaro because of subsoil water. Okay, there are still cities that are existing beneath the waterbed of these rivers that exist in that part of the South Asian subcontinent. But due to obvious reasons, we cannot excavate them. Why? Because if we do, it will be flooded with water. Whatever evidence there is still existing will be gone. Okay, so right now, it is only, I would say, majority of the excavation still, is left to be done. So it is safely to assume that it is more than 3 millennia ago that these civilizations existed. All right. Now the authors of Indus civilization, meaning who exactly were the people who lived in those civilizations. In the very beginning of this series, I had spoken about this, that there are two parallel theories or two parallel narratives going on, and you can accept either one of those, whichever finds more conviction within you, or whichever satisfies your appeal to reason. The West wants you to believe that their people came from their part of the world to teach us things that are good about these civilization, and things that are bad about these civilizations came from the earlier inhabitants, and those people too came from outside. There was nobody living on this piece of land. It was only forest and animals. Okay, now this is the very core of the idea or the reason why the pagans have been denied exclusive nation statehood, because it is said that since you are pagans, but that does not mean that you are the original native inhabitants of this land, and hence you do not deserve an exclusive nation state. Okay, now you can, reverse engineer this theory. Why are we denied exclusive nation state? Because we are not the original inhabitants of this land. What makes them think that we are not original inhabitants of this land? Based on their assumption that since your civilization was so advanced, somebody has had to have come from our part of the world to teach you these things. Now, why did they have to do that? To maintain their racial superiority, to prolong their rule over our colony, or their colony, that is Bharat. So it's all very well planned and crafted narrative. Okay. So yes, R.C. Majumdar says the population was definitely heterogeneous. On page number 196, population of Mohenjo-daro was heterogeneous, meaning it was a mixture of a lot of races. Again, this is, based on the assumption that Aryan invasion theory is true, but during his time it may have been true. Currently it has been disapproved. Diverse racial elements, but also of free racial mixture. So, the authors of the civilization, there has been quite an amount of speculation. Words like Aryan and Dravidian, which primarily denote linguistic groups, have been indiscriminately used. Okay. Now, Aryan as an identity is something that is very much appealing to people. Okay, we have seen what had happened in Nazi Germany. Okay, Nazis try to imitate and adopt our identity, that is Aryan. We are the direct descendants of Aryan. They are not. So, they wish to adopt this identity and poorly imitate the social structures that existed in our country during those times. They failed miserably because they did not have sufficient intellectual depth. You can translate all those Sanskrit literature, but you will not have the mindset that you need to execute those, things that are written in those Sanskrit literature. The majority view prefers to hold the authors of Indus civilization as speakers of Dravidian. Okay, again. So there was this some Sir, some John Marshall. Okay, so if these white peoples are theorizing and hypothesizing about something that is clearly they have no skin in the game, why is a white person so much curious about the civilization of the Aryans or civilization of the descendants of Bharat? You should ask yourself these questions. Why? Because these things do not happen for free. There is somebody who is spending money and resources for them to do this research. Okay, so there has to have been some motive. I'm not saying that motive is malicious. All I'm saying is there has to have been some motive other than simply academic or scholarly pursuit. And even if they discovered something, how do we know that they were intellectually and scholarly honest? Did not they have sufficient incentive to lie or maintain their racial superiority? So there clearly was a vested interest. So there was this one sir who goes by the name of John Marshall. Okay, this is what he says. Okay, and it clearly reeks of racial superiority. Let's hear what he had to say. It is impossible at present state of our knowledge to come to any definite conclusion, but it has to be admitted that there is no conclusive evidence against the view that ascribes the authorship of the Indus Valley civilization to Rigvedic Aryans and regard it as logical corollary, a lineal descendant or the culture described in the Rig Veda. He himself is saying there is no conclusive proof. Okay, then why exactly are you stating these things? Mr. Marshall, not speaking ill of the dead. Let me just leave it at that. He might have been very venerable and very admired and adored and, whatever person in his country and in his part of the world. But when he's studying about civilization in this part of the world, obviously he had a clear bias and a vested interest. Now, I'm not willing to trust the intellectual integrity of the whites because they have stolen enough from my civilization for me to trust them again. Okay, we must remember that during the period that intervened between it and the Indus Valley civilization, the Vedic religion was incorporating many alien and non-Aryan features such as phallus worship. They are talking about the Shivling worship, the Naga worship, magic and spells, and was already tending to become comprehensive. So he's operating under the assumption that the the Aryan faith is something that came from outside, and was when it had already arrived over here, it was accommodating some of the practices of the inhabitants at that time who had also come from outside. So why exactly are people coming over here then? If all the races came from outside, nobody was living in this part of the world. Why were they exactly coming over here? You have to think of these things. All right. Next up is extent, connections, and survivals of the Indus civilization. It is on page number 199. Let's see from where it extended. What were the extents of this civilization? The very fact that Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, the first two prehistoric sites excavated, they are about 400 miles apart. Okay, they are not very close to each other. The sites of Mohenjo-daro and the sites of Harappa, they are both 400 miles apart, meaning there was clearly some expansionist tendencies. And expansionist is an inadequate word, I would say. We cannot call it expansionist, because there is also an argument to be made that who's to say that these civilizations weren't parallel developments. Why should we assume that somebody from Mohenjo-daro went to Harappa and started that civilization, and somebody from Harappa went to some other place and then started that civilization? Who's to say that these civilizations did not come up parallelly? There can be some binding thought between these civilizations that grew independently, and that is what we mean when we say the pluralist society that is Bharat. Each and every individual thought had come up independently. It's just some non-coincidence that these things came up independently came up independently on their own. But in a way, they are similar because they followed certain principles that are innate and organic to this land. That could also be true. Okay. Confined and restricted area. Okay. Terracottas discovered from Buxar and at Patna, that is Pataliputra, indicate the extent of the cultural influence of the Indus Valley eastward. Okay. There are also some excavations and some artifacts that have been discovered from as far as Patna, Bihar. Okay. So imagine the current day Pakistan, where the ancient cities of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa exist. Okay. So structures resembling the ones that have terracottas that have been discovered in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro have also been discovered in Patna. Okay, so clearly, again, you have two options. You have two theories or two narratives. Either somebody from this part, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, went eastwards and spread the Aryan culture, or it came up independently. It's possible. Who's to say it is not possible? Thus, the Indus Valley civilization seems to have embraced the whole of Sindh, the Punjab, the bulk of Kathiawar, a place of the coastal region, the valleys of the northwest frontier province, and a part of at least the Gangetic basin. Okay. So there have been sites that have been discovered as south as Maharashtra, the southernmost part of Maharashtra, and as east as Bihar, Patna. Some of the sites have also been discovered in the current day Bangladesh as well. Okay, so this entire theory that it started from that land and then spread inside, it might be true. I'm not denying it, but I'm also putting out there a parallel theory that who's to say or who's to deny that all of them did not come up independently as well. Okay, explore that angle. Let's see what comes out of it. At any rate, there is an overwhelming mass of evidence showing that a flourishing trade, probably through the land routes of Baluchistan, existed between Indus Valley and Sumer in ancient times. So there were some trade relations between Sumer, as in Iraq, the current day Iraq, and the Indus Valley existed. So do you think it was an overnight phenomenon? Okay, establishment of trade in those times where okay, imagine in the current time, in the contemporary world, if two different countries had to establish a trade between both the countries, it would take at least, I would say, 5 years. Negotiations, signing of agreement, setting up of logistical channels and whatnot. So 3 millennia ago, when if two civilizations had to establish trade relations, what time would have elapsed between them to work out negotiations and establish logistical channels? So if 3 millennia ago trade relations existed between Sumer and Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, how many centuries prior to that would the negotiations and the establishment of logistical channels would have been fructified, would have fructified? This is again something for you to ponder and think. Okay. Indus Valley people also use sea routes despite lack of corroborative evidence. Okay. So it is safe to assume, okay, it is safe to assume that the Indus Valley civilization obviously dates far back in time than what has been taught to us in schools or taught to us by our education system. All right, that's all. This is all for chapter number 9. The next chapter promises to be very interesting because that is chapter number 10, and the title of that chapter is the Aryan problem. Who exactly were Aryans? What was the language that they spoke? Okay, does it have anything to do with the Nazi Germany, the idea of the Aryan race? That is something that we will explore in the next episode in this series of ancient history of Bharat. That's all for this episode. Thank you for watching.